Okay, all right. Before I welcome everybody, welcome those of you coming in. I'm Christine Lenihan. I am the Director of the Council for Disabled Children and delighted to be sharing this session. And thank you to those of you who are coming into the chat, also telling us who you are and where you come from, because that's great. It's really helpful that we see that mix of people. And thank you, Sarah, for loving being in DCO, because we are very, very proud of you all, as we are for everyone who works within SEND. I've worked within SEND for the last 42 years. I worked out this morning when somebody asked me. It is my favourite thing. I love working with the passion and the energy and the commitment of the people who work in this area. So really, really pleased to be here and really proud to be Director of the Council for Disabled Children. So somebody's going to keep me to time. I am going to do an update on where we are in relation to the SEND review. The slides we're going to go through relatively quickly, but don't worry about it too much in terms of the fact you will get them and see them. Remember the rules. If you've got a question that comes out of this, then put it in the chat. We will try and answer the questions we can today. If there are questions we can't answer today, we will post them when we post all this information after the national conference. And somebody from my team who is more able than me will tell you how all of that works in a bit. Okay, but let's get going. All right, SEND review. So why are we changing a system that only came in 2014? So this is our analysis. That currently there's too much anger and disillusionment in the system. That clearly it's no longer financially sustainable, or at least that's what the Treasury think, that the outcomes it delivers are not consistent enough, and that it doesn't yet, despite all the amazing work that people do, properly reflect joint agency, delivery and responsibility. So next slide, Marie. Lost Marie. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is the aim of the review. It's a system that builds confidence. Underlining so much of what we do is confidence. We see the best possible actions when confident professionals are working with confident parents to make confident decisions. That's what we're trying to get to. It's got to actively promote and incentivize join up. So often within a broad system, we're looking at incentives that put people in different directions. So how do you get incentives? We have to understand spend and impact. It might sound boring, but it's really, really important. How much money does the system need and what does it deliver? And are we using that money effectively? And the big one for me is one of my real worries as the challenges have developed over the last 2 or 3 years in particular, is we really need a system that actively values the life of children with SEND and their families and promotes outcomes. Sometimes I worry that the complexity of the system challenge gets translated into the children are too complex or the families are too complex. Neither of those things are true. The children and families are a valuable member of a system that we have to make work. All right, next one, Marie. Thank you. Okay, so this was the announcement of the review. This was the formal DFE slide that was set out in September 2019. You'll get all of these. Marie, next one, please. Okay, the only reason I put this slide in is one of the things that the team that are running this conference does is works a lot on health. And I still think this is one of the best slides that actually shows the relationship between SEND and health and how it works and what it should do. So it's there as a reminder of the stuff we already have in the system that doesn't always work, but actually is clear in the code of practice. Next one. Okay. So following some initial work, the Council for Disabled Children now, a good year ago, maybe a bit more than that now, well, pre-pandemic anyway, ran a number of consultation sessions for a whole range of people in relation to this. It is a good slide. And what came out of that and a whole range of other feedback sessions were these 3 priorities. So this is what the review wants to do. looking at outcomes, looking at mainstream schools, and looking at EHCP processes. All right, next one. I'll tell you about this in a bit more detail. Next one, please, Marie. Okay, outcomes. Right, co-production going through this, but thanks, Marie. But one of the things on this, and one of the things that we've picked up in all our work saying authorities on written statements of action, is this whole stuff about, are we really clear about need? Do we know how many children we've got? Does the data tell us what we're doing? Does it tell us what we need to do? So we've been looking at identifying need. So if you think about it, one of the big challenges since the Children and Family Act has been the fact that SEN support programs have not been developed as well as they could have been. So families see EHCPs as the only way to get support. So you've seen that massive rise. So what do we do on the early intervention side? And this stuff about engagement with health and care, I'd say that about a huge portion of the Council for Disabled Children's delivery work over the last 5 years has been about helping people understand the contributions of health and care to plans. What is social care advice? What is health advice? What does it look like? The team have been doing some work with DCOs lately and mental health on what would mental health advice look like in a plan? How does that come together and what does it do? So that sort of real stuff about really clarifying the roles of the agencies involved and how they support. And somebody who's joined us from therapies. Therapies has been something we have looked at again and again. What is that link? How does it work? How does it come together? And stuff on post 16, this really clear underlying message that part of the role of effective children's services is to support young people to be the most independent adults they want to be. So what is our role in that? How does that work in post 16? And how does that work in post 19? All right, next one. Okay, mainstream schools. So I was looking at some stats that the DFE had compiled yesterday, and they showed us that 82% of children with SEND are actually in mainstream schools. So, and that's where they should be. The vast majority of children should have their needs met within a mainstream setting that is appropriately resourced and supported to deliver that. So one of the things that the department's been really keen on is looking at what is ordinarily available provision. So what we mean by that is if I'm a child in a school with some additional needs, how is that usually dealt with within school? If I'm a child who's got dyslexia, if I'm a child who's got a range of needs, how are you going to work with me to keep me in school? It should just be there. I shouldn't have to argue for it, fight for it. It should be part of the range of offer that a school or indeed an early years setting provides. So how do we do that? And then the second part of it is how do we incentivize schools to support children and maintain them properly within their school? So if you think about behaviour, for example, you know, some of the incentives at the moment around behaviour lead to children coming out of school. How do we support schools properly and incentivise and hold them accountable to do things properly in those areas? Yes, Charlotte Jones, you're right. It is SEND support and EHCP. And school groups. So it's really hard to think now, isn't it? But when the Children and Families Act came in, we were at the very early part of academisation, of free schools and whatever. Clearly that journey is much stronger and the government is keen on a full academisation system. I think that's fairly clear. And so what does that mean for children with SEND? Are there opportunities in maths? We work some really good maths, which mean that across their groups of schools, they can provide and develop provision and work together. Some maths, for example, run their own alternative provision, but also when you've got groups of schools like that, what are the issues about admissions to those schools? What are the issues about accountability to those schools? So some really difficult but important challenges that the review needs to deal with. Next one, Marie, please. Okay, and this sort of EHCP stuff. So EHCPs have grown and every stat we see puts them growing again. It is my firm belief that at least half of those EHCPs are not needed. They are there because we have not got a strong enough system which actually says, what does this child need? What can be developed at the lowest level of need? How do we do that? Whatever. EHCPs, thank you for the clap. EHCPs should be for the most complex children who absolutely have to have multi-agency support to meet their needs. For the vast majority of children, we should be looking at a really good SEND support process. So how do we do that? And what does government do to support that? And what happens locally to support that? So there is a lot of thinking around that and a lot of acceptance that that's where we need to do. And then if children need, yes, I wondered how long it would be before the tribunals came up. If children need an EHC plan, then how do we make the process streamlined? How do we stop it being a bureaucracy that actually everyone gets lost in? That's not what it was set out to do, but it's what's happened to it. So what is it we need to do that, and etc. And then if you were looking at a graph on where children are and why there are problems in the funding of the system, you would see that where that problem is actually the whole issue of children moving into special schools, EHCPs rising at stages 2 and 3, and that move out also into the non-maintained and independent sector. So at the moment, we've got a special school system that is full, but needs looking at. Are the right children in special schools? Should there be more special schools? What does the evidence tell us, etc.? So there's some really challenging problems that the review has got to look like. And the stuff about tribunals coming in the chat, I think we hear most days. What is the purpose of tribunal? How does it want to work? I said to the DFE the other day, I will never get away with it, that almost, and if you're a parent, please don't be annoyed with me, that I wanted to run a course called How Do Local Authorities Win at Tribunal? And that was not because I don't believe that the tribunal has a role in the system. It was about the emotional challenge and drain for everyone in the system by the time a child gets to the tribunal is a failure. What is it we need to do that gives families support and helps local authorities deal with that before we ever get there? So some interesting stuff. Okay, next one. So why is the review going to support change? Because there is strong, remember this review is a DFE review, but very, very firmly backed by number 10. You know, so a clear, and if you watch the intricacies of the parliamentary system, you'll see there's been Education Select Committee reports, Public Accounts Committee, endless reports about SEND. Yes, and we're back to the battleground. We can see that. And this focus on strong political commitment to what is it we need to do two things. Build parental confidence in a system that works. So you take the heat and the anger out of it, but also make it financially sustainable so it doesn't keep changing and it doesn't keep moving. So that's, you know, that's what the review is trying to do. And that's the sort of key thing that's behind it. Okay, next one. This is what we think might get in the way. And of course, what I'm going to talk to you is about delay in a minute. Because everyone believes the system should change, but each part of the system believes that the change should be the change they want to see. So it's something about how you build that on common folk. So, you know, I've been watching your chat about tribunals, and it's really interesting. Local authorities, usually a two-way person, hate tribunals. Can we get rid of them? What can we do? Parents, usually to a person, love them, except when it all goes wrong. So how do you bring those opposing views into a system that works, that has a common thread and narrative about what it wants to achieve and the principles about what it wants to achieve? One of the challenges for the Children and Families Act was we made, rightly, I was very proud of the Children and Families Act. I was very proud about its vision and its principles and its belief, but it made a set of promises, rightly, but those have been struggled to embedded in delivery. So whatever comes out of the review has to be something that can be delivered and changed. And of course, the issues about money, you know, can we spend money in the right places? And how do we know that we're doing that? And given the amount of money that CENDIAS has, Sendias, that's because I'm reading some on Sendias. Sorry, Sendias, you're very nice. We like Sendias services. But given the situation that COVID's had on the financial health of the country, what money are we going to find and what does that look like? And the answer is we don't know yet. All right, next one, Marie. I've run out of time. Okay, so this is what I wrote 3 months ago. I said this could be a green paper. A green paper potentially leads to legal change. It's really important that we understand that. It was going to be on track to be out in this school term. It will come out as a consultation. That must be an Ask School slide. It key people respond. And these are the other things that are coming outside along it. So we're not going to do too much on that today. Next one, because somebody's going to tell me I'm running out of time. Next slide, please, Marie. But this slide's important. The SEND review is now delayed. The reason it's delayed, I think it's really important that people understand. And it is this, the broader change, that the integrated care service changes in health, the issues that the care review is throwing up, the whole stuff about COVID education recovery, and some fundamental questions about what does education mean and that move to academisation. The other thing is, from all of the feedback that we've been involved with, one of the things that is key is to get those accountabilities and responsibilities right. How can we really, really clear how this system hangs together and who does what and how do we know that? And be really clear about the implementation of reforms. So whatever comes out, people can see a pathway that shows where that change happening. And so what government is doing at the moment is it's just taking some extra time to ensure this is tested and explored. So we want to test this against a whole range of things. If you do that, how does it fit here? How does it fit there, etc. And so that consultation is now expected later this year. It will come out to consultation and it will be a broad consultation. And certainly from the Council for Disabled Children's point of view, we will be very clear about being part of that and engaging people in this sort of way. So there are other slides in this presentation, but I am running out of time. And so I am going to stop here, but you will see the rest of the slides as they come to you in the next couple of days. Okay, thank you very much. Back to you, Amanda.
Thank you, Christine. So have we got any quick questions for Christine in the chat? Oh, I can hear myself coming back. That's very unpleasant.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Charlotte. That is exactly what we're looking at. We can't afford to go through another review and be in the same position. And I think almost the sort of delay in the delay in the review coming out is because actually it stopped to take a deep breath that says, is this enough for change? Will it do what it needs to do? How can it do that? How can it do that in a change in NHS? How can it do that in a change in school system? So from my point of view, my world, as many of you know, is to go in and say, OK, so if I am a child, I'm a family, I'm a school, whatever, what will this review for me that's different, and how will it implement the change that we want to see? So absolutely right, there's issues about going on. Things like national EHC plans, templates, Louisa, I think are almost taken for granted. I'm fairly sure that's going to come out as streamlining the process. And the preparing for adulthood outcomes are key. The issue now is taking them from the fine words of the outcomes, which everyone smiles at and says, well, that's great, to something that actually says, how do we actually track these outcomes? How do we start in early childhood, going through a system that leads to the best outcomes? And who does that engage with? So, you know, where does the skills bill come in? Where does the DWP come in? Where do employers come in? What happens? So it's some sort of formal stuff. And yes,
I'm going to stop, Christine.
You're going to stop me, that's fine.
I am, because well, it's interesting because the very latest thing in the chat is asking about the SEND inspection framework. So I felt that was
Nick. Yes, of course.
That was a brilliant time to bring Nick on, and he can answer that question and then move smoothly into his presentation. And also, I was going to suggest that when we come to the questions after Nick, that there might be, there might be enough space to pick up a few of the. So if you keep your eye on the chat, Christine, and maybe you and Nick can negotiate sharing a bit of question time later on, if that's all right with Nick.
Yeah, that's fine.
I was very relieved to see was in fact here.
Hi, Amanda. Hi, Christine. Good to see you.
And you. Welcome, Nick. Over to you.
Brilliant afternoon, everyone. Thank you for asking me today. It's real pleasure to be with you for an hour or so this afternoon, and great to just listen in to Christine's. I think it was described as a whistle-stop tour of the SEND review, and a number of things that Christine said are important. You'll see feature as important in the slides that I'd like to take you through this afternoon as well. So really quick introduction from me. My name's Nick Whittaker. I'm one of Her Majesty's inspectors in education at Ofsted, and I'm Ofsted Specialist Advisor for SEND. I'm going to spend a bit of time this afternoon talking to you about the work that we have been doing with the Care Quality Commission. It builds on a little bit on Deborah's question in the chat about the so what for the future of area SEND inspections. I'm going to get to that in my last slide via 2 or 3 other slides about 2 reports that we have published in the past few weeks. The first is the Supporting SEND report that we published back in May. So this is work based on the experience of children and young people in mainstream primary and secondary schools, field work that we did back in 2019, so prior to the pandemic. And the second is the Old Issues, New Issues, Next Steps report that we published in June, so a few weeks ago now. I'll also refer to 2 commentaries that Amanda Spielman, the Chief Inspector, published. The first back in June 2020, and the second published alongside the Old Issues, New Issues, Next Steps report. I'm going to refer to some of the detail in Amanda's most recent commentary because it sets out, it sets the direction of for the work that we have been doing and will be doing on the development of the new area SEND framework. So these reports are important because they do 2 things, I think. They bring together what we have been learning from our research, from our inspections about what is and isn't working for children and young people with SEND and their families. And that's where there's real alignment between the things that Christine identified as important in her slides and what I'm going to say. And as I've said already, they set out our plans for the future of area SEND inspections. So what we will be doing when the current programme of inspections and revisits concludes. If you've heard me speak before, you will know that I will always start by saying that I believe that inspection is an important part of any effective accountability system, but we are part of it. And when I reflect on the reports that Christine was talking about, whether it's the Education Select Committee report from 2019, the NAO report, other significant reports, I can see how important the findings from our inspections have been in getting to that understanding of what is and isn't working. But I guess more important than that, I know from my time as an HMI and before that as a head teacher, just how much children and people and families rely on our inspections to support and challenge those who have responsibility for their experience, progress and outcomes. And of course, and this needs to always be said, but the primary purpose of inspection, whatever the inspection remit, is to bring about improvement in the services and settings we inspect. So our aim in Ofsted and in our work with CQC is always to be intelligent, focused and responsible in the way we work. And that means in practice that the approach that we take to inspection and regulation is informed by everything we've been learning from our inspection work, from research, from our engagement with children, young people, families, other stakeholders, that to the best of our ability, we focus on the things that will demonstrably make the biggest difference to children, young people's lives. We use the time that we have, the energies that we have, the resources that we have to best effect, and particularly where improvement is most needed. And we take time to do what I'm doing today, which is to explain what we do and how we do it in a clear, open, and in the most transparent way we can. Which is really why I'm here today. So this first slide, a starting point, summarizes what I hope you'll recognize as some important learning from the Supporting SEND research report. We used a case study approach for this piece of research, a relatively small number of case studies, 26 in total. Children in mainstream primary, mainstream secondary schools, some with EHC plans, some receiving support for SEND without a statutory plan. So just running through those bullets, a really key finding and is that top one, a recognition of the importance of high quality and universal services, in this case in education, and the reality that this has a protective benefit for children and young people. So if in practice we think about things that are fundamental to all children's learning and development, such as the development of their receptive and expressive language skills, the importance of their development of early reading and mathematical knowledge and skills. And we can see that done well, these are some of the things that prevent children and young people's needs and difficulties increasing such that they need something additional or different. So in the way that Christine described, we see the importance of looking at the earlier stages of the graduated approach and understanding how well they're working. But in addition to that, understanding what is it about the quality in universal services that prevents some children and people from needing something additional, different in the first place. And I noticed earlier on in the chat there were some comments about curriculum, and clearly that's one of a number of important features of a high quality education that we're interested in. The second bullet point, the importance of a strengths-based approach came through this work strongly. An approach which really builds on the things that children and people know and are able to do, as well as being focusing on the things that they find difficult or challenging and how they impact on their learning and development. But I'll come back to this point, but a real cornerstone of that work and an essential starting point that we could see was having positive relationships with children, young people and their families, and having high expectations of them from the outset. So in some ways those high expectations manifest in the form of a real ambition to build on strengths. I've said a little bit about curriculum, but what we could see through this work is that those decisions that schools make about what they're going to teach and how they're going to teach it, ensuring that the curriculum is prioritised effectively, that children and young people are learning the most important knowledge, that it's selected and sequenced well, and that they're able to master what they most need to learn before moving on to the next part of the curriculum came through really strongly. And that we could see that was the opposite of where children kind of skate across the curriculum without really developing and deepening their knowledge successfully. And of course, there's an important dimension of this, which is, I suppose, in some ways, it's there is a parallel to the anticipatory duty in the Equalities Act, I think, which is that we could see the benefits, the protective benefits of a curriculum that was kind of engineered for success, where leaders and educators has really thought very carefully about the parts of the curriculum, the knowledge within subjects that children often struggle to learn, remember, and be able to use and apply, and a curriculum that was really focused on teaching those things well, the most kind of generative knowledge in subjects. But we could see that for that to work well in practice, it had to bring together really strong subject and curriculum knowledge with really good specialist knowledge about how children and young people with SEND learn and develop. As I've already said, not just in relation to ambition and expectations, but we saw building positive and trusting relationships as being the cornerstone of effective co-production. And I think what I hope you will see in what I'm going to say today is just how centrally important that has been in all of our findings. But the idea that this is we can see it as a cultural phenomenon within an organization. It's those values, the way of understanding children and young people's views, experiences, what's important to them, reflecting on what educators, leaders, or others know is going to be important to them in order to be successful, is embedded in the organization's culture. In almost every piece of work that Ofsted and CQC have done in recent years, and certainly in my time as an HMI, and through our programme of area inspections, the fundamental importance of the SENCO role in and of leading in primary and secondary schools, but also in mediating and making sense of children and young people's experiences and lives is huge. However, we often see that work, those roles, are constrained by bureaucratic and organisational factors, and we see some of those manifest in other important leadership roles, such as the DCO DMO role when we're inspecting area SEND. And of course, the most effective practice is underpinned by strong multi-agency working. But in this research, there was a gap between the ambition for working in a multi-agency way and how that was reflected in practice, and some really practical things such as delays in accessing specialist services, support, resources, caused children and people's needs and difficulties to escalate, which further made working in a multi-agency way even more challenging. And what I would say about this particular piece of work is that we don't think we don't think it's added any great new insights into thinking and practice, but we got to these things in an objective and evidence-based way. And through this work and the Supporting SEND and the Old Issues, New Issues report, we have sought to contribute positively to what can often be a negative discourse. So next slide is just a really brief summary of some of the learning from the work that we did in the interim period when routine inspection was paused. Things that also featured in the June report. As you know, and we saw through our programme of visits, many of the problems that children, young people and families experienced during the period of the pandemic pre-existed the pandemic, but we've seen through our work have been intensified by not only the disruption to essential education, health and care services, but also a loss of of informal supports, other changes in the communities where children and young people live. In the reports that we published back in June, we started by acknowledging that area leaders, practitioners had gone above and beyond to support children and young people with SEND and their families. But as you'll have seen, if you read the report, you will have, you'll have noted that we see many of the problems that manifest currently as not just pre-existing the pandemic, but has been long-standing. Some, going all the way back to the 81 Act. The bullet points on the side you'll be really familiar with from other work and other things that we've said. Again, I think the one that I would really highlight is the third one. Not least because we saw it having this really strong amplifying effect on children and people families' experience, where those pre-existing relationships were strong. They had a protective benefit where children, young people, families were more vulnerable, more isolated, less connected into the resources and support that were available to them in the local area, where they were very reliant on informal means of support. Many have become more vulnerable, more isolated, and some of those were the families who told us that they had felt abandoned in this time. But more broadly, and as HMCI said back in her July 2020 commentary, we saw three underlying problems here. This problem with identification of children and young people's needs, so a problem of under and over identification of need. Some children being identified as having SEND when in fact their difficulties arise from something else. Delays in identification of other children and young people's needs. This, as I've said, this problem about quality and universal services, so the things that when they're done really well, prevent children and young people's needs and difficulties from escalating. And then this bigger problem about a lack of clarity about who is responsible for what. This thing that's been described as the problem of many hands. And again, I could see in the chat that there were a number of comments about the kind of adversarial culture that this has created, and we see that sense that families battle to get their children's needs identified, assessed and met, as in part arising from these problems and the fractures in the way that professionals and services work together. So on the next slide, I just wanted to highlight more clearly two or three things from the most recent report. So over and above what I was saying. So in looking back at the period of the pandemic, but in thinking about what it's been like over a longer period of time, we can see that there is a continued lack of ambition for children and people with SEND, and as we've already heard, real variability and some limitations in opportunities for employment, supported employment and training. So the translation of those preparation for adulthood outcomes, ambitions, and in the way that they're described in those broad outcomes into things that are truly meaningful and aspirational for young people. Continued problems with accuracy and timeliness of identification and assessment, these wider problems with the curriculum and teaching in early years settings, schools, further education and skills settings. So the things that cause some children to struggle to learn well and make progress. We acknowledge that there are problems with sufficiency and sustainability of funding, as has been described elsewhere, and that many of these things have been amplified in the last 12 to 18 months. So what we do think is needed is summarised on this slide: real clarity about who is responsible for what, driven by better coordination and clear accountability, more effective multi-agency working. So it's simply not acceptable for parents and carers to be the driving force for ensuring that professionals and services work together. Much greater emphasis on high quality and universal education, health and care services. Real priority given to the teaching of language, communication, early reading, and this agile and responsive approach alongside a curriculum in the way that it is conceived and taught being genuinely engineered for success, greater ambition translated into practice through more consistency across the full continuum of provision. So those are that's our kind of manifesto. The next slide, which is my last slide, is about the so what for us in our work in Ofsted and with our colleagues in CQC. And during the period of the pandemic, in addition to our programme of interim visits, to the work that we've done on restarting area inspections and revisits, we've been working on the development of the new Area Send framework. A key part of that development work has been, the dialogue we have had with children and young people themselves through a range of local, area, and national stakeholder groups, parent and carer stakeholder groups, our colleagues in provider groups and local area leadership, so across education, health and care. And what I wanted to do for the last few minutes of my session was just take you through some of the important changes that we're proposing for the new framework. You'll have read, I'm sure, that we will be focusing more sharply on the impact of area send arrangements on children, young people and families. That feels right. It feels like the right time to do that. That's a change from the current approach, which focuses more on how well local areas have implemented the 2014 reforms. I can say with confidence that we've got to that thinking by reflecting on what we've learned from the current area inspection programme and from all that our stakeholders have told us about what is important to them. We've identified 3 critical features of an effective local send system. So the things that it takes for area send arrangements to result in significant and sustained improvement for children, young people with SEND and their families. And our plan for the new framework is to evaluate each local area's performance against those features. So if you're familiar with the EIF and the way that it sets out factors, so the things that research, inspection evidence, the professional consensus tell us are most important, and then inspectors gather and evaluate evidence against those things. The approach with the approach here is with the has some similarities. So the first of those 3 areas is about strategic leadership. We can see there needs to be a strong partnership approach and a shared and ambitious vision that all partners in a local area, the local authority, health leaders and commissions, but importantly, colleges, schools, academies, early years settings, health and care providers have critical roles. We see that partnership as the foundation for effective area arrangements, but particularly for important activities such as strategic commissioning in an area. We think that must be informed by leaders having a clear picture of children and young people's needs and starting points, which in turn must be informed by effective strategic co-production. Without that, the work that we've done under the current programme would suggest that leaders find it difficult to commission the right services and support. We can see that area leaders need to create the conditions within which effective practice can grow and flourish within individual organisations and in the way that those organisations work together, and that requires real emphasis on developing the knowledge and skills of the whole education, health and care workforce, as well as strong arrangements for multi-agency working. And then in all of this, and this emerged from particularly from the revisits to local areas where we can see that that progress is being made in addressing weaknesses that inspectors have previously identified. What we see is that area leaders have a really clear line of sight between their self-evaluation strategy, the actions that flow from that, and the impact that those arrangements have on children, young people and families themselves. So that's the first of the three features. The second is practice. So in our construct of an effective local system, we can see that there needs to be high quality in, for there to be high quality in a system overall, there needs to be high quality in each of the component parts of that system, that's vital. As I've said more broadly, that relationships between children, young people, families, leaders, practitioners are critical. There must be high quality in education, especially in the curriculum, so that children are acquiring and developing the knowledge, skills, qualities, attributes that they need, and that they are being helped to use it and apply it, to transfer it and generalize it with greater confidence and independence. The graduated approach, in the way that it was, it has always been conceived, is always essential. When that's working well, we can see that will lead to children and young people's needs being identified at the right time and assessed in a timely and an effective way, and that work, the response to children and young people's needs and difficulties will be evidence-based. There'll be strong multi-agency working. You know, the top and bottom of this are a highly effective assess, plan, do, review cycle, underpinned by strong strategic commissioning arrangements, which mean that children and people can access the increasing resource and specialism that they need to, without the need for assessment for an education, health and care plan. The third and the most important of these three features is the impact of this on children and young people with SEND and their families. And what we can see is that if an area has effective arrangements, then this will lead to improvement in children and young people's experience, their progress and their outcomes. The services and support they receive will help them to be prepared for the next step in their lives, whether it's into employment, further education, training more broadly into their adult lives, so that they can be as healthy as they can be visible, valued, included in the communities where they live and work. Alongside all of these things, we are also thinking about broadening the scope of these inspections so that we also look at arrangements for children and young people in alternative provision. There are several reasons for doing that. We think the area send arrangements and areas AP strategy are often, particularly the commissioning arrangements, are often intertwined. We know that many children and young people who are placed in AP also have send. Lastly, we're working on a move from the one-off approach to inspection and revisits to areas with a written statement of action to something that is more systematic, something different from our current approach, which helps us to connect what we know from our different inspection remits and supports continuous improvement in a more proportionate way. And I'm just thinking about Pat's comment in the chat as I'm saying that the importance of connecting together the insights that we have from our provider level of inspections, not just in education, but also in care and in health, and aggregating the insights from those alongside the evidence that we gather, a system level inspection. What is absolutely clear in our approach is that we intend to look at the effectiveness of leadership and practice first and foremost by understanding how those things impact on children, young people with SEND and their families. So our starting point for inspections under the new framework will be understanding what it's like for children, young people, families, gathering evidence about why it is as it is, working out the systemic reasons why it is as it is, reporting those findings as clearly as we can. And just my final point, and I think this would always be the case, that the test of what we do, as it would be the case for everyone, I think, is that what we do brings about improvement in children, young people's lives. We believe that we will get to that point by making sure we take time to listen and learn from all of our stakeholders, understand children, young people, families' experience as deeply as we can, and in these inspections focus with absolute clarity on the things that will make the biggest difference to them. I can see, Christine, that there are a lot of questions in the chat, so that might be a good point for me to pause.
Indeed, Nick, that's really helpful, and thank you. You can see from the chat that you've generated lots of conversations. I suppose one of the big ones coming out is, how do we reward schools that are good? You know, there is a sort of combination of stuff in the chat about some schools that appear to make children with SEND unwelcome and don't fulfil them, but also recognition that there are loads of brilliantly inclusive schools. But do you think we've as yet got an inspection system right that recognises and rewards the good?
I absolutely believe that the EIF, the Education Inspection Framework, it is a force for good in children, young people's lives, but in particular in the lives of children, young people with SEND. And I say that, having been an inspector for a chunk of time, but also more so, having been a teacher and a senior leader and a head teacher, since the late 1980s. And I would argue that the construct of a high quality education that is set out in the EIF, is the one in all of my professional life that values and recognises what is important for children, young people with SEND. What I would say though, Christine, is, and to colleagues, is remember that we were inspecting for barely 2 terms under the EIF before routine Section 5 inspections were paused. There've been a handful of Section 5 inspections since, only really in schools that were previously in a category of concern or requires improvement, where a Section 8 inspection had been deemed Section 5. if in Amanda Spielman's in Amanda's annual report from December 2020, she highlighted some of the things that we could see from those 2 terms of inspection were causing schools to improve or schools to decline. The arrangements for children and people with SEND featured prominently in that. So in schools that were improving, not surprisingly, we saw really strong improvement in arrangements for identifying, assessing and meeting needs. In schools that were declining, that was characterised by low expectations and weaknesses in provision.
Okay, that's really helpful. I think that the notes say that people are really keen that the EIF framework gets out there into schools. There's a couple of school governors there saying it'd be really good to have our role recognised, and the work was going on. One of the things I know, but maybe people on the conference don't know, Nick, that you work really closely with CQC. And that actually this has been a joint enterprise in lots of ways. But one of the things that some of our colleagues from health are asking is whether we should also invite CQC, get my initials in the right way, to come along and talk to one of these meetings and give that focus. Do you think that'd be helpful?
I think that'd be great. To be honest, Christine, we would normally appear as a double act.
Do a double act, yes. Exactly.
Myself and Lee Carey in particular, we often it's either me, Lee and Andre, or me and Andre, or Lee and Andre in various combinations. But I think that I was invited to today a little bit later than the other speakers, so apologies that didn't happen for today's session.
That's absolutely fine. We always appreciate, Nick, the time that you set aside. We know how busy things are, and we also know that you've got to dash off to a meeting at 2 o'clock. So we're not going to.
We should say a very big thank you to Nick, because the reason he was invited late was because we were fully expecting to have DFE telling us about the actual SEND review rather than Christine telling us what might be in the SEND review sometime soon. So thank you, an incredibly warm thank you, Nick, for saving our bacon.
So thank you. Anything else that comes up in the chat, Nick, we will come back to you with. So people, I know you've put stuff in, but we will go back to Nick and come back to things as we do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great, Christine. If I could just say, I'm actually retiring at the end of August, and I'm in work for the next month or so before I have a little bit of leave. So if there are questions that anyone has, then if they could get them across to me ASAP, I will make sure that I respond to them. And if you don't mind, because I do recognise, several people on this call, either from colleagues I've worked with through all of our different stakeholder groups, colleagues from areas that I've inspected over the years. Would you mind if I just took this opportunity to say thank you to everyone? It's been, this might be an area that is in policy is really contested, but I can honestly say that I've very, very rarely met colleagues who, like me, aren't doing this because they absolutely believe that we should be making a difference to this group of children, young people's lives, and that's been an absolute privilege.
Thank you, Nick. And some of us are still coming to terms with your news. I'm still in the grieving process, because you have been such a powerful advocate for real change for children and families, and you've never wavered from that. So you take also the sector and authorities, as you can see in the chat, absolute best wishes. And if you want to disappear and fish, that's fine. And if you want to come back and do other things with the sector, whatever you do, whatever input you make will always, always be welcome.
Thank you.
So
all the best, everybody.
Thanks. Bye, Nick. Okay, we are moving on. We are delighted that Lorraine Mulroney is with us. Lorraine can explain her new job because she explains it much, much better than me. And I'm really, really pleased that also this coincides with the fact that the briefing that we've been working on integrated care services and SEND is finally gone online on CDC's website today. And I'm hoping that if I smile at Daphne, it will appear in the chat miraculously. There is so much change going on in the NHS, and we have to really thank people like Lorraine who hold the flame for children with SEND through that and make a difference. So, as always, Lorraine, you are very welcome.
Thank you, Christine. I'll move on to the next slide because this is the positive news. I think I certainly have been waiting on it for a while, and I know that colleagues are very excited. You might not have got the memo or the email, so let's just make sure everybody understands what's going on. So from the 1st of June, I've moved into a new role, as you can see, National Specialist Advisor for SEND for NHS England Improvement. Those of you who know me from before, I've worked on this agenda for the last 5 years in my post as a senior nurse for children and people. But what this means is I can wear the SEND hat only, which is fabulous. So I think it's really great news, and I'm really proud to be appointed to that role. What that then means is that we will have a stronger, I guess, a stronger voice for SEND across the NHS. But there are some positive things too. So we'll have 2 new senior responsible officers at exec level and director level. Both are CEOs of trusts, and they also work for NHS England Improvement on the community services side, learning disability and autism and mental health. So that's really exciting and really helpful for us. And actually just last week on our national call, one of the SROs was championing the cause of SEND, children and people with disabilities, etc. So we know that we're working with the right team. It will take time to adjust and get our new governance and our plans in place. But also, it also means that we're on the same place as everyone else in terms of all the other children and young people's programmes. So much more matrix working across with the different departments and within NHS England itself. But the better news is people come with money, which is also fab, because those of you who didn't hear my story before, but remember SEND wasn't in the long-term plan. It didn't come with a set of costs with it or resources. So we now have funding for SEND specifically in health up until March 2024, so the end of March, the same as our other programmes at this point in time. So what that means is that we want to increase our people resources both at national level and at region so that we can support improvement on the ground. So the next steps for us is I'll be recruiting a new national team by the autumn. I'm just thinking that through at the minute. It looks at the minute, it's in draft, that there'll be around a total of 8 of us, around 5 full-time equivalents, 3 clinical posts and non-clinical posts, but also the most exciting news, and I've got to get this right, so I'm working with colleagues to get it right, is that I'm looking to have a family carer advisor to work in our team and also a young person with lived experience, and I think that's fantastic news. So our regions also will be receiving some funds, and they will be looking at their capacity in terms of our SEND regional leads. And we're drafting our plans. So you're probably going to ask what's in our plan. So let's move to the next slide. So bearing in mind it's really draft because we are, like everyone else has said, waiting on a lot of government guidance going through. So at the moment, our biggest thing is obviously the SEND review. So we have to see, and working really closely with the teams on that, what it means for us from a health perspective. It also means we've got to work with our mental health colleagues, our learning disability colleagues, our children and young people's colleagues, our personalisation team, etc. because SEND is everybody's business across the organisation. In recent weeks, you don't need to look far, but you know, therapies has been a very big topic on our agenda, linked to recovery and moving back into school, and all the surveys that we've seen from our colleagues that we work with about how difficult it can be to get back into a place that we were before COVID and even before then. So we've been working with our cross-government partners and the Royal Colleges. And just last week, we heard the health provider's voice. We had 90 people across the clinical therapy teams from the health providers talking about what it means for them. And, you know, it's fantastic news. It means that we can move together with this agenda. We just at this moment in time can't say a lot more about it, but we are looking at, do we understand the workforce challenge? Do we understand the commissioning challenge, etc.? But work across with our government partners, because in the long-term plan, there was a big focus on speech and language and communication for the under fives, but that is not the whole therapies in terms of children, young people SEND, or all children, young people. Designated officers, you know, still there in the plan, refreshed all the baselines so we know exactly who's in post, what you're spending at the moment on these posts, what they look like, how they're variable, and we're preparing some work ahead of the SEND review on that, because we are, like you said, Christine, very passionate about these roles, and I really want to make sure that they are in the right place with the right skills and the right support behind them. Inspections, revisits, I don't think I need to say much more about that. That's a sort of given, but we're working really closely with CQC and Ofsted and all our government partners on that. Another one that you've heard me talk about before, but I think it's rising up again and we need to address it. So we need to find a home for it. So nursing within schools, looking at the delegated duties, because I know that the Royal College of Nursing are looking to update their guidance. We're also working with DFE and the Medicines in Schools group, because we need to bottom this out. We've got so many challenges and it's wider than just support in the school. You need to look at the commissioning arrangements, the finance arrangements, etc. So that is that one. And the last one that many people will be delighted to hear, because continuing care has always been on our agenda. But at this point, we are discussing its early stages of aligning an operational framework that's all age, that will include children's continuing care and continuing healthcare. So we're just working through with the national team on that now, and I'm really delighted about that as it moves forward. So it's all draft and it's all being worked up. As we know more, we will tell you more. But I'm sure you're going to guess the types of people who need to come and work in the team to help us deliver on this agenda. So next slide, please. Just going back to all the guidance, I just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on where we are with different things. So those of you who have looked at, when we've shared through the forums, the Integrated Care Systems Design Framework was published a few weeks ago. Key statement in there on SEND that we will be clarifying nationally at government level with guidance around statutory duties to ICS bodies. That is in my inbox today and we are working really closely on that. So there will be clear guidance about what's expected of the ICS in terms of SEND. So just so that you're up to speed with that one. And there will be more guidance than wider on ICSs around the provider collaboratives and how they will work. And those of you who have read that any of the guidance that's come out, the provider collaboratives are acute trusts and mental health trusts. It's not necessarily community trusts, but they are encouraged to be involved around, you know, population health. There is more work to come on what does it mean for the ICS partnership boards. We're waiting on that. And in recent weeks, we've NHS England have published their Oversight Framework, and what that means is it looks at how NHS England will have, what duties they have on oversight across ICS, CCGs and providers. It brings everything into one place, whereas before we had different frameworks. It's not specific to health or children, young people, but there are key issues in there around leadership, quality, finance, data, all different types of things. So it's just there for your information. There will be a new one, of course, from April next year. And as you all know, and I'm sure you're going to be watching this closely, the Health and Care Bill was published or into Parliament on the 6th of July. They've had a first reading. It's a second reading, I think, this afternoon. So those of you who are interested in that might be wanting to watch it on Parliament TV at your leisure. But as we progress through with that, there'll be more guidance that will come. So I think a difficult time for colleagues who are working at the level ICS, regionally and nationally. Lots of change, but I think hopefully change for the better, and definitely children and young people and SEND are getting a voice in these. If you look at the Health and Care Bill, you will notice, I'm not saying you've read the 230 odd pages, but you will notice in there that the Children and Families Act is referenced, and when it says CCG, it then talks about substituting the CCG with an integrated care board. So I was pleased to see that as it landed. So more detail to come. Next slide. So I guess I should have done these slides the opposite way around, but what we've asked our regional colleagues to do is do what we call a blueprint for SEND in region that will work with their ICSEs by the end of October. So first draft by them. So you may be asked to get involved in some of those discussions through your regional SEND leads. We are also looking to do what we call a heat map. So try and understand where ICSEs are with SEND and what that means. Are we ready? What will it look like as we progress through the next 6 months? And a full programme plan by the end of August, and a review of governance about where SEND sits and how we will operate, and obviously the recruitment by the end of September. That is my plan. It does change day to day, but hopefully that helps you to get the direction of travel. And I've got my last slide, which essentially is usually my nice things to say. Keep connecting with your regional SEND leads. If you don't know who they are, please ask me. Keep sharing their communications. I think it's fantastic, these events. It's absolutely amazing. I'm so pleased about people coming this afternoon to do workshops. And keep that mantra, SEND is everyone's business. And most importantly, look after yourselves and your families. So thank you very much. That is the end of my few slides, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Many thanks, Lorraine. We are so pleased that this is where we are now. The level of excitability, hearts, clapping, all sorts of stuff in the chat is stronger than I've ever seen. So that is absolutely brilliant. So what have we got? I think a bit of anxiety about change as always, trying to make sure those ICSs really deliver for children and young people. But you know, there's a very strong cross-government lobby on that, I think, as well as the sector doing its usual bits, and CDC as part, and an NCB runs something called the HPIG group, the Health Policy Influencing Group. So we work closely to make sure those changes happen. I think lots of stuff. I think there's some sort of, Lorraine, one of the things that's really interesting, seeing all the positivity, is why do you think we've got the change now? Why is SEND suddenly so much more firmly on the agenda? Apart from people like you nagging everyone you know on a daily basis, don't mean, but it does feel like we're in a sort of sea change, doesn't it?
Yes, I think, Christine, it's the opportunity as we go through lots of change to open the door again and have a conversation about what it means. That's one thing. The second thing, I guess, that has, you know, we've all been through a journey over the last 18 months, and what COVID has exposed of how children and families have had to cope with changes to their lives. I think we have seen that loud and clear and listened to that. I think that definitely has got it at the top of the agenda, without a doubt. And it's not nice to say that it takes something like that to happen to make that happen, but I think we're definitely going in the right direction. I think also SEND is starting to get, you know, people are starting to realise that we are talking about children, young people and families here. Just because we label as SEND, that means a whole load of different things, and other people should be getting involved in this conversation too. That's my reflections.
Thanks. I think that's really, really helpful. And I think one of the things that I've noticed over COVID is the power of the networks, you know, the DCO, the DMO forums, the other networks and whatever, and that ability to be able to bring the real lives of children and young people to the heart of government and influences really quickly. So as you say, we've made it human.
Yes.
And I think
absolutely.
that's made a big difference. And as somebody's written on the chat, plus we as a whole group are very passionate and shouted advocate. Absolutely right, Helen. And all we'd say is you need to keep doing it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Amanda, I'm handing back to you. I don't know if there's anything else for Lorraine, but I'll come back to you, yeah?
Okay. Thank you very much, Christy. And I realised just before we move to the polls, I think this is our 5th one of these. And that means that we didn't even bother to introduce ourselves because we just kind of assume you know who we are. So since Christine had a slide that told you, I haven't had one of those. So for those of you who haven't met me before, I'm Amanda Allard and I'm Deputy Director at the Council for Disabled Children. And at the top of your screen on the other side, I think, is Anna.
Hi, yeah, Anna Gardner, Assistant Director for Health at CDC, so working with Amanda and team. And
Anna, Marie and Daphne are the ones who have put this event together, so thank you to them. So we have got, we always like to just sort of test the temperature of the water and find out how you are. And Lorraine started this excellent tradition. We would like you to go to Poll Ev. And we have got a couple of questions on Poll Ev for you to answer. So the first one is, what are you most proud of in your local area? And just to say, DFE are always, and just to remind those of you who don't know, this event is funded through a contract that we have with the Department for Education. And I think just sort of going back to the conversation that we were just having about, you know, why things have changed. I really do think the forums and the fact that at sort of critical time points during the pandemic, you were all brilliant at giving us real-time feedback that really then kind of, you know, would enable us, you know, to prep various officials for government meetings, with, you know, ministerial meetings rather. And I think it really helped to keep SEND. I mean, obviously it was an issue during the pandemic, but the fact that we were able to give that kind of real-time and detailed information from people on the ground, and really help ministers to understand what was going on the ground, I think really helped to raise that profile as well. So thank you all for, you know, it's always amazing to see how well especially the ZMO DCO forum is used. But it's been a real benefit to us. But anyway, that was apropos of me saying that, you know, DFE are always really interested in these answers, and they do help us to kind of both think about planning for future events and also to make sure that DFE understands, you know, that where you're at. Yeah, and as Anna says, if you can't get into the poll, don't be voiceless. Stick it in the chat, and we will make sure that we join everything up together. So Anna knows that I can witter on almost endlessly as you put your things into the chat. It's I mean, I had it quite well honed, but the pandemic, I think, has really supported me practicing my wittering skills. Yeah, 16 months of wittering.
Oh, a sleep strategy, that sounds good.
Oh, that's very exciting. Embedded whole system self-evaluation, we might want to see that. That sounds really great. And we have to, basically, if we move on to the next question, we close that one, don't we? So I'm just going to hold fire. And if anybody does have, oh, they've moved on anyway. Thank you, Jane, for sticking yours in the chat. We're doing quite well on time. So if there are any, just make sure as well, because we will send questions on to anybody who's spoken this afternoon who we haven't had a chance to have to put questions to. But Lorraine is still here, so so instead of me wittering, if there are any questions that you would like Lorraine to answer, then now is a good time, while we're understanding what keeps you awake at night. So, and I was quite interested earlier on in the question in the chat about whether Health Education England were promoting the therapy, you know, jobs in therapy to young people as they think about their careers. And I guess I had a question for the questioner, which is the issue about a lack of people applying, or is there also an issue about a lack of training places? Is it just the former, or is it the latter as well?
Amanda, I don't know who actually asked the question, but I could say it's both. From what we've heard, it's not even just about recruitment in the UK, it's recruitment internationally in the same way as nursing. It's a challenge to get people in. And also in terms of the placements, you know, what do the universities offer in terms of what the children, young people's learning experience? So, you know, we heard some of that last week on our call with our health providers. So much more to do, I think.
Mm. I mean, it feels to me as though it's a fabulous job. All of the people I meet who, you know, because obviously most of the DCOs have you know, come from a therapy background. You just seem to be, it just seems that it must be the most amazing workforce. So why doesn't everyone want to be one, Lorraine? That's my question.
Exactly, but we need to shout louder.
Oh,
There's some real
removal
themes coming through. Lots of workforce issues, lots of therapy challenge.
Right.
Quite a few points around the DCO role going forward and whether that looks like it'll be statutory and workload of DCOs.
And we are fully expecting it to be statutory, aren't we, Lorraine?
Yes, we are pushing very hard for that.
I've suggested that people, when they see the SEND review, might be pleased about the recommendation.
Yes.
That probably takes me way beyond what I meant to say, but it's good news, folks.
We rely on you, Christine, going way beyond what you're supposed to say.
All I can say is when it lands, please answer the appropriate questions that you are passionate about.
And I know from a couple of the DCO regional sessions that I've sat in, and I think that's on the agenda for their next meetings, thinking about how they might respond as a collective as well.
No, good. So it's interesting, isn't it? So much of what comes to CDC and fits in our conversations at the moment is a sort of spread. Just seen something about health visiting and school nursing. People are so pleased to see school nursing on your workload, Lorraine, but also that sort of stuff around behaviour, mental health, ASD, some of those very fuzzy lines about who's responsible, who does it, how do we make that complex bit of a system put together, really seems to be the challenge. And lots of the stuff coming through, I'd say, is some of the stuff as those that's working it know that the SEND review is trying to look at, which is what the hell do we have to do to go downstream? You know, what do we have to do in those early years, those early conversations with families, those early stuff that stops the sort of movement fast through a system up to complexity? That's not an easy question, but it's one of the conversations that's going on. The therapy stuff, ministers are also engaged in those conversations at the moment, are they not?
Yes, absolutely.
And whilst it's, you know, whilst it's, so what's the word? What am I trying to say here? Whilst we worry about the fact that things are keeping you awake at night, I guess what is comforting, as I see that very long list, is that actually those do feel like things that we have in our sights. You know, that we are having, you know, very energetic conversations around, you know, with lots of different partners. And, you know, and all we can hope, I think, is I was listening to, don't know whether any of you listen to podcasts, but I was listening to the Life Scientific the other day, and a climate change scientist talking about that sort of complete change around in, you know, people's approach to climate change, and, you know, and just pushing at an open door. So let's hope that that's the situation that we're in for SEND at the moment. And it's not just Lorraine and what I'm sure will be an amazing team under her to help move things forward, but that actually lots of different doors will be open because of a realization of, you know, of absolutely having to get this right. It just, you know, I know of all of us, you know, in this meeting, you know, it's just absolutely common sense and as plain as the nose on our face. And it feels as though maybe other people are beginning to understand that as well.
Quite a lot in there as well about areas not having been inspected at all or revisits, which feeds into something Amanda and I have been talking about. And so a few years ago we published some audit tools, which were never around compliance with inspection, but actually we've had some requests around redeveloping those with a lens on the new inspection framework. So that might well be something that, if we think there's an appetite, that we can look to do. So if that sounds helpful, let us know.
Yeah,
we can make a case for it. And it was helpful just to get Nick's view on the 3 kind of priorities of the new framework too. So we would frame anything around that.
And if we did it again, we thought we wouldn't have a local authority tool and a CCG tool, because it feels as though people are in such different positions. Actually, you know, you are now, I would hope in most local areas, in a position where you can sit down together and fill it in. And if worst comes to worst, you know, you can email it to each other, but actually having a joint tool that asks about where are you as a local area, not where are you as a CCG, where are you as us or ICS, where are you as a local authority, but actually where are you as a local area.
Looks like there's appetite for combined tools. That's really helpful.
Excellent. Right, well, I think we can say thank you very much to Lorraine for her fabulous presentation. Move over to you, Anna.
Yeah, and I think Christine has left us too, hasn't she?
She has left the building.
We're in safe hands.
Although not like
okay,
because Elvis is dead. But anyway, sorry. Do carry on, Anna.
Nothing like Elvis. Yeah, so I'm going to quite a practical session now in response to some of the conversations we've been listening in on in regions, or the conversations we've had through our DFE contract Amanda mentioned. And that's, I mean, there's been lots that we've just talked about in relation to workforce, which is a big issue. So specifically, I'm going to think about workforce development in the virtual world, and what that looks like is actually some of the e-learning that's available to you. So I thought we'd just take the chance to point out what is available to you all. Everything that I'm going to mention is free and available for you all to use. So I'll go through that and just explain what's there. There are various things from CDC and also some of our partners. So it's a bit of a run through of what's available to you. So next slide, please. Starting with CDC's current e-learning offer, some of you will know about that, some of you won't. So a bit of a refresh for those who do. We have quite a big suite of e-learning now. On the side there, we have various different modules and within those different lessons. So we have a suite around holistic outcomes in HCPs. I'll talk to you more about that in a second, what's in there. We also have some 3 different levels of health advice learning. Same for social care. And we have a newly published one on annual reviews. So I'm going to talk to you about those. But just to give you the background on where they are. So they're, like I said, they're all freely available at that link there. It will be in the chat, and we'll make sure we send it by email too. It is e-learning, so it's self-guided, and for you to dip in and out as you want. Mainly and primarily written for professionals, but it is open to all, and there'll be different parts of it that parents will find useful, that some of the parent forums might want to use strategically to think about how they shape their conversations locally too. Different learning levels. Obviously, you generally do it on an individual basis, but we know that areas are using it. You know, people are doing it individually and coming to a team meeting and talking about what they've learned and how that informs their practice. Also at a kind of pan area level, it's informing some of the conversations there. We have also, with a couple of areas, delivered kind of facilitated conversations. So following people in a service doing the training, we would come together virtually at the moment and pull out some of the common themes and help them develop an action plan based on what the learning has told them. So there's potential to do it in that way too. Next slide, please. So just to tell you how they've been developed, to hopefully reassure you that it's not just us sitting behind a computer and writing content. They've all the different modules have been, the need for them has been identified in our wider work through sessions like this or conversations in regions and local areas. We have focus groups at the start to decide on content, to identify content priorities, and also to look for willing volunteers to help us write the content and to feed into content with existing resources and things that are that we think are helpful to add in. They're interactive, so there'll be various exercises, bits of interactivity to make it a bit more exciting. It's not just a case of reading through slides. So they all have the same kind of format and they're all built in the same software, so they look very similar. Next slide, please. So just before I go into the specifics of the different modules and who they're for and what's in them, there are a few things that we cover across them all. So we talk about legal requirements where that's applicable in the different levels. We also think about roles and responsibilities, and we do have some modules that are aimed at specific groups, specific services. We highlight and draw out good practice, always have the importance of the children, young people and their family voice as central to all of the work that we do. We use case studies, often a case study approach, so you can kind of be familiar with one young person through the module and use them to apply the learning. And a chance for you to reflect on your local area's practice, and that's where the facilitated conversations that we can do in person or virtually feel like it comes into its own, because we can pool everyone's reflections and that helps develop an action plan if there are changes to be made to local processes. Next slide. So I've taken the approach of looking at the audience, and I'm going to talk to you now about the modules that are available for the audience that's on the slide there. So that's basically everyone that might be involved in SEND. So from strategic leads to practitioners across education, health and care, anyone that's writing advice for an EHC plan, the plan writers or coordinators themselves, caseworkers, and like I said, parent carers. So the following modules apply to all of those groups. And people will use them in different ways. There'll often be a quality assurance approach for some of the team leads. They might want to make sure that all of their service have done one of the modules to make sure we're all coming from the same place in terms of knowledge. Different approaches, but all apply to all of those groups. The first one being the holistic outcomes in education, health and care plans. So I'm just going to talk you through the learning objectives so you understand what's in there. Do go and look at them. Like I said, they're all free, freely available. You need to make an account on our website and that will be yours. You can then log in and out. It keeps track of what learning you've done. You can print off certificates. So that it's very easy, but no cost attached. Learning objectives for the holistic outcomes. It's very much how aspirations act as the golden thread throughout a plan. So really back to kind of the basics of why it's important, and outcomes, what we mean by outcomes as well. They link to various resources that my colleagues have developed around the importance of outcomes, what outcomes are and how we talk about them. So the importance, as I've said, of children and young people's voice in the plan, what outcomes mean to children, young people, parents, professionals, and how all of those different perspectives need to be brought together to develop outcomes. Also how advice bridges the gap between needs and outcomes, and how to write good, smart outcomes. So that's all in that suite of modules. Lessons. And the next slide, I think, is our annual review training, which again is applies to that broad audience that I mentioned at the start. So there are 5 lessons in there, and this is new. It was published in April. And we developed it with our colleagues at Mott MacDonald and also NDTI. So there's a specific focus on the Year 9 and PFA in the 5th lesson. So 5 lessons: introduction to delivering quality annual reviews, the importance of the annual review, requirements of the process, so the kind of mechanics, what we think are features of a good annual review, and then, like I said, that focused annual review in Year 9 and the additional considerations that we need to take at that point. And then I'm going to go into some of the kind of agency or service specific offer that we have. So for our health audience, we have quite a big offer actually. So 3 levels of health advice learning. So level 1 is for health practitioners who rarely give advice for EHCPs, and I'll go into a bit more detail about what's in that in a second. Level 2 is for those who frequently give advice for EHC plans. So, therapies, people who are kind of ingrained in that process locally. And level 3 for our more strategic colleagues, or those who have a quality assurance role around health advice, and our designated medical officer and clinical officer colleagues too. And I think Christine had already mentioned this. So in September, we will be launching a new module. So it's specific to children and young people mental health services, and it's to help them, to support them to write advice into the EHC process. So we've had the focus group for that. We're at the moment just kind of pulling together what came out of that and drafting a curriculum. I think that the general consensus was that although a lot of the content in levels 1 to 3 would apply, actually we know our colleagues in CAMS are incredibly busy, so we'll probably drag some of the content and it will all sit in one place, so that actually there is one module for our colleagues in mental health services to do, just so it's kind of one place and hopefully less onerous for them. So next slide. So content for level 1 is the kind of, I suppose it's the back to basics. So it's for those colleagues who aren't so involved in this process. So why outcomes? What are outcomes? We talk about them a lot, but what are they? Also a bit about the eligibility for a plan and thinking about that graduated response and what SEN support looks like too. Really seeing health as one piece of the jigsaw around SEND. Goes into the sections of the plan. Again, aspirations is the golden thread, describing health needs and how, as a professional, you do that in an advice writing format. Again, advice is that bridge between needs and outcomes and recommending provision. So that's level 1. Level 2 is for those who are much more involved again. So it's a bit more focused on people who know the process and who are part of this. So again, advice is the bridge between needs and outcomes. Writing accessible advice for non-specialists and how to write advice that doesn't lose the nuance of your professional experience and expertise, but writing it in a way that is understandable and accessible. So balancing the simplicity that's needed for a plan that is a document that lots of people from lots of different perspectives read, but being comprehensive and ensuring that you talk about need. Shaping outcomes and supporting targets that sit underneath outcomes. Balancing being holistic within your professional remit and the wider role of the advice giver, perhaps in the annual review. So that's level 2. And level 3, just to remind you, that was around quality assurance, so DMOs, DCOs. So it's about looking at advice as part of the process. So for those who possibly have a role in designing and reviewing the process locally. So coordinating health advice as well. We've got some examples about how areas do that, DCOs potentially do that. Thinking about multi-agency planning meetings and, like I said, quality assurance and the kind of measures of what quality assured health advice looks like. Our social care audience, we also have a suite of learning there for them. So in terms of who in social care, it's for early help practitioners, it's for social workers across all teams, not just disabled children's teams, team managers, and basically anyone involved in providing social care advice and information for an EHC plan. And it's 2 modules. There's a module around the role of social care within the SEND system, so that the kind of broad overarching look at social care within the system, and then a focus module similar to the health modules around developing good quality social care advice and information. And our social care colleagues also have an offer which we'll make sure we share around social care and through various contracts that we have. So we'll make sure we share that in the chat too and the follow-up email. And then for the education audience, so this is where some of our partners come in. So the whole school SEND programme have an online training. Well, it is training, I think, that has been face-to-face. It's now also online. Again, it's free. So it's their online SEND reviewer training at the link there, the 3rd bullet point there, for SENCOs, for leaders in education. And the idea is it's about improving skills and confidence of the school's workforce in supporting school high quality SEND provision. There's also a lot, so on the SEND Gateway, lots and lots of resources around specific needs aimed at school staff. So do have a look there or share it with your education colleagues too. And next slide, please. And slightly different, so not e-learning, but we thought you were a receptive audience to hear about this. So our colleagues at National Development Team for Inclusion are running again their SEND leadership programme, which this year will be a mixture of online and residential. I know some of you on the call will have taken part in previous years. There's some quotes there about the value that previous participants have found of that. It's for senior local authority SEND managers and leaders with a social care or health colleague. So some of the DCOs, DMOs have done that in the past. Applications close on the 23rd of July, and we'll make sure that you've got the link to that. It is subsidised. I think local areas do have to part fund it, and you have to come as a partnership, so local authority and social care or health colleagues as a duo. But it is heavily subsidised and lots of really good feedback. And I think the conversations we've had so far this morning show just particularly think about Nick's conversational leadership and strategic leadership, there's a real need for that. And I can see lots of comments in the chat about people who've been on it and recommending it. So if you're interested, have a look. Daphne's popped the link in the chat there. Next week it closes, and I think there's probably quite a bit of work to do around applying. You have to do a bit of work at that year end, so do have a look if you're interested before the 22nd of July. Don't give it yourself not enough time to do it. So that is a whistle stop of what is available via e-learning and some other approaches. And I think what struck me as we've been listening, and when we had the CAMS focus group around that module that's coming, people are asking about other service or profession specific modules, and I wonder if there is a need for that. So do let us know if you've got any ideas about other modules that you think would be helpful. Thinking therapies, and I know that's such a big challenge from a different perspective, but is there something that we need to do around that too? So we're very open to any suggestions you have on that too. And have I had any questions in the chat? Do I need to answer anything, or has Amanda been doing that for me?
I think so. Well, so there have been suggestions for a module for educational psychologists and also for specialist teachers. Yeah, so I think we can definitely sort of have a look at that and follow up on those, and also just lots of interest about whether or not the modules could be on the Health Education England learning site. So I was just sharing in the chat the fact that we've actually got a conversation on Friday with Health Education England, so we will follow that up with them then. And also, did you want to say anything, Anna, about the conversations you'd been having with the trust about who wanted to put it on their own platform?
Yeah. So a trust from the Midlands approached us to ask if the health advice modules could be on their own platform and added to their sort of mandatory induction process. So it's possible from a tech perspective, and we're just working up a sort of agreement. I mean, there's no cost to that. It's just the sort of practicalities of making it available in local areas. Then taking responsibility for it, I suppose, and if we update it, that would be the trust responsibility for ensuring that. But yeah, it's very possible, and if that's something you're interested in, let me know, because we're doing that work now. So hopefully if we do it once, it'll apply.
CDC and NCB are looking at updating their e-learning platform so that this is where the tech gets slightly beyond me, so it is possible to have an e-learning system where other people it looks as though they're hosting your modules on their site and they get all of the CPD information, but actually it's still centrally held. I mean, I feel I'm one up on Christine around the tech, but I don't really understand how that works, I'm going to be honest. But anyway, just to be really clear, we do understand that not only do you appreciate the modules, but also lots of you would like to understand, where you want your workforce to have done. You want to be able to track that and identify how that's going. So we do have that in our sites.
Karen, yes, it's all free. I made sure that everything that's linked in the slides is free. There are some, so Nathan also had some paid for opportunities, which you'll be able to find on our website, but everything that we've suggested there is free and available now.
Yeah, and that's actually sorry, I was just going to say that one of the things that's kind of holding us back in moving to a new system is lots of the systems that are available have a limit of, they don't cost very much, but then if you go over a certain amount of learners, they charge you more. So obviously we don't want to limit, people's access to the e-learning. So that's one of the challenges that we've got.
And Julie, I can see you've put, I think someone else as well asked about the work that we're doing with the South East. So we are developing some modules which are for a broad audience around, I suppose, send awareness, really. So those modules will be developed. It's come via the South East, but that's part of the conversation we're having to understand how that can be made available, hopefully across all regions, because there's nothing kind of region specific. So that's work we're doing and work that we'll keep you posted on. We really don't, we're doing that work and we don't want anyone to go and duplicate it and, use your effort elsewhere. If you've got resource to do that, we don't want you to do something that we're already doing. So as soon as we know how that works, then we'll make sure we keep you posted via various forums.
Okay, so I think we might be able to just go to our comfort break a few minutes early, Anna. As Daphne did put in the chat, but some time ago, if you think you signed up for a workshop session, but you haven't had a link to that workshop session, then do email Daphne, who will put her email. In fact, Daphne is very quick, has already put her email in the chat. So do email Daphne. Otherwise, I just want to say thank you in advance to all of the workshop facilitators who have kindly come along today to update you on some really interesting different bits of work that they're doing. So I do hope that you enjoy the workshops. Please do, if you're leaving now, I know some people don't do the workshops, please do fill in the evaluation form. And if you are doing a workshop, then we'll put the link again in the workshop session so that you can evaluate that as well. Thank you to all of our speakers. It's been lovely to see you all, and hopefully some of you will be enjoying some leave quite soon. So do have a lovely summer. And when is our next one of these, Anna? Because I think we've already got it booked in, haven't we?
It is. It's October.
6th of October.
6th of October.
So save the date. And we are likely to be having a focus on learning disability and autism then, because that landscape is moving so fast, and I know that was one of the things that was keeping a fair few of you awake at nights. So yeah, watch this space. We will be back to you to let you know what's going to be on the agenda in more detail. But lovely to see you all, and do enjoy the workshops. Don't forget to do the evaluation form. Anything else I should say, Anna?
We have a webinar next week. We'll send a link to join, but it's focusing on integration. So we've got Rochdale who are doing a lot of work around integrated leadership on SEND, and also Camden. So it's a 2-hour webinar, which will be recorded if you can't make the session, but we'll send a link in case you can.
And yeah, just to remind you, yes, you will get all of the slides, but also all of the this session and all of the workshop sessions will be recorded. So if there are colleagues that you know of who wanted to come and couldn't make it, then do let them know about it. And as Daphne rightly says, don't go to your workshop now. Do make a cup of tea. Workshops start at 3 o'clock. Lovely to see you all again, and I will see some of you at 3 o'clock. Take care.